Invincible comics have introduced a host of unforgettable villains over the course of its run. While not every antagonist was as menacing or evil as Thrag, Conquest, or Angstrom Levy, our titular hero faced numerous smaller-scale opponents. These adversaries may not have threatened the entire world, but their encounters still profoundly affected Mark and helped advance his character arc. One such character is Powerplex, who may not play a major role in the Invincible universe, but his encounter with Invincible poignantly highlights Mark's heroism and underscores why he is such a compelling character. In today's video, we'll explore the tragic story of Powerplex and his complex relationship with Invincible. Scott Duval, better known as Powerplex, is a metahuman capable of absorbing and unleashing blasts of energy. He led a relatively ordinary life, working as a scientist at the Global Defense Agency to support his wife and newborn son. However, his life took a dramatic turn following the brutal fight between Omni-Man and his son, Invincible. Tragically, Scott's sister was one of the many casualties, which ignited a vengeful fire within him. He came to believe that Invincible, like Omni-Man, was guilty of murder. Driven by rage, Scott began to covertly steal biotherm discs from his workplace. These discs were crucial for him to properly store and release the energy he absorbed. Without them, the energy would leak, and Scott struggled to control it. In a desperate bid to confront Invincible, Scott, known as Powerplex, began to create chaos around the city. However, much to his dismay, the hero who responded was not Invincible, but Shapesmith, who even transformed into Invincible's likeness to handle the situation. Frustrated by this deception, Scott left the scene in anger. When he returned home, his wife confronted him for attempting to engage Invincible without her knowledge. Surprisingly, she was not upset about his quest for revenge, but rather that he had not informed her of his plans. She wanted to witness Scott's confrontation with Invincible. Driven by this twisted form of support from his wife, Scott decided to quit his job and dedicate all his time to tracking down Invincible. He orchestrated another attack on the city, hoping to lure out his target. Yet again, Invincible did not appear. Instead, the Guardians of the Globe arrived to manage the crisis. Frustrated and determined, Scott returned home to devise a new plan, one that would involve his family in a dangerous way. His new scheme was to stage the kidnapping of his own wife and son, broadcasting a message to the world that he would kill them if Invincible did not show up. He used an abandoned military base to set this grim stage. Remarkably, his plan succeeded in drawing Invincible to the location, who believed the kidnapping threat was genuine. With Invincible finally before him, Scott had set the stage for the long-awaited showdown between Powerplex and the hero he blamed for his sister's death. Upon arriving at the scene, Mark urged Scott to release his wife and son, but Scott instead confronted him with a question about Jessica Duval. When Mark responded that he did not know the name, Scott revealed that Jessica was his sister who died during Mark's fight with Omni-Man. Mark expressed deep regret, acknowledging the many lives lost in that brutal battle and offering his condolences for Scott's loss. However, Scott was unreceptive to the apology. Convinced that Invincible was beyond redemption, Scott attacked, proclaiming himself as Powerplex. This name rang a bell for Mark, who had been warned about Powerplex by another superhero, specifically about his ability to absorb energy from explosions. Attempting to gain the upper hand, Mark began to pummel Scott on the chest, only to realize too late that Powerplex could absorb all forms of energy, including the kinetic energy from his punches, which only made the villain stronger. Scott unleashed a powerful blast that sent Mark flying. Determined to end the confrontation, Mark tried to rescue the hostages and flee. However, Scott's wife and son, who were not actually kidnapped, refused to cooperate. In the chaos, Scott seized Invincible and began unleashing massive bursts of energy in a desperate attempt to kill him. These attacks did little damage to Mark. Instead, the energy currents traveled across the floor, tragically electrocuting Scott's wife and son. Devastated by the accidental death of his family, Scott broke down in tears and lashed out at Mark again, blaming him for the tragedy. Mark, trying to defuse the situation, pleaded with Scott to stop before anyone else got hurt. Overcome by the gravity of his actions, Scott finally collapsed, consumed by grief. He was later arrested and placed in a special cell designed to be devoid of any form of energy, where he vowed to one day escape and exact his revenge on Invincible for the perceived wrongs. But Powerplex's imprisonment was short-lived. Just one issue later, the Earth was invaded by evil variants of Mark. During the chaos, one of the evil Invincibles released imprisoned villains to sow further discord across the planet. Powerplex was among those who managed to escape, but he initially decided to postpone his revenge until after the conflict had settled. Once the invasion was repelled, Powerplex wasted no time in attacking Mark. However, his assault was swiftly countered by other superheroes. Before he was apprehended, Scott took the opportunity to publicly blame Mark for all the destruction, proclaiming that he should be held accountable. Although the other heroes did not share any hostility towards Mark, Scott's accusations were enough to instill a sense of guilt and self-doubt in him, adding a complex layer to Mark's emotional struggles. Despite his history of villainous acts, Cecil Stedman offered Scott Duval a chance to redeem himself and become a hero. Scott was given an opportunity to join the Actioneers, a team of superheroes primarily featured in the Astounding Wolfman comic series. During this period, Mark left Earth for several months to engage in the fight against the Viltrumites, allowing Scott time to gradually move past his plans for revenge and start anew. However, Scott's thirst for vengeance was reignited by a catastrophic event, the attack on Las Vegas by Dinosaurus. Dinosaurus, a socially conscious supervillain, justified his actions by claiming they were for the greater good. He argued that destroying Las Vegas and replacing it with solar panels would provide humanity with free energy and save the local ecosystem from pollution. Despite Invincible's efforts to thwart him, Dinosaurus succeeded and the city was completely devastated. Although most people were evacuated, some remained, resulting in numerous casualties. When Scott learned about this event and heard that witnesses had seen Invincible just before the explosion, he was thrown into a rage. Memories of his revenge quest resurfaced, and despite attempts by his team to dissuade him, Scott once again set out to confront Invincible. During a routine patrol, Mark was blindsided by a surprise attack from Scott, who slammed the hero to the ground. Scott vehemently expressed his inability to forgive Mark for past actions and how his life had been better while Invincible was away in space. Knowing that any physical retaliation would only strengthen Powerplex, Mark refrained from fighting back. Instead, he engaged Scott in a heartfelt dialogue that took an unexpected turn. Mark shared the immense burden he carried, explaining that every death he failed to prevent weighed heavily on him, and there wasn't a day that went by without him thinking about those he couldn't save. He articulated his relentless effort to save as many lives as possible, suggesting that his presence during catastrophic events had prevented even greater loss. As they talked, Mark cautiously approached Scott, who was visibly weakening. Reaching out, Mark placed a hand on Scott's shoulder and offered his deepest condolences for the loss of his family. But he also gently reminded Scott that it was his own actions that had inadvertently led to their deaths. This moment of stark realization caused Scott to confront the truth about the tragic event, leading him to collapse in tears. Mark stayed by his side, offering comfort and an apology once more. This interaction showed Mark's ability to resolve conflicts without resorting to violence and helped Scott confront and begin to heal from his grief. Reinvigorated by this profound encounter, Scott returned to his team, now on a path toward personal growth. This transformation was later reflected in his actions during the Flaxan invasion of London, where he stood as a true hero alongside Earth's defenders. Through this journey, Scott not only found closure but also redefined his identity, becoming a worthy hero of his own right. With the help of Invincible, whom he once considered to be his greatest enemy,